Welcome to Brattleboro Community Television. My name is Chris Lenois, and today we're visiting with Shap Smith, who's been a state representative for Lamoille and Washington counties for 7 terms, and he has been House Speaker since 2009. He is currently seeking the Democratic Party nomination for Lieutenant Governor, running against Dave Zuckerman and Keisha Ram. Welcome, Shap.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Now, a lot of people know you who follow politics, certainly because of the amount of time that you've served in the House. And you've been an attorney up in Burlington for a while, so people up in the northern parts of the state are very familiar with you. What do you think people in southern Vermont know about you?
Well, over the last 8 years that I've been Speaker, and frankly, since I was a representative, I have wandered around the state and walked around the state and talked to people. And I've come down here to talk to people about various issues. Went last year and hung out over at Against the Grain and have looked at issues around Vermont Yankee and have spent time downtown. I've actually tried cases down in Windham County. So, I've gotten to know people over the years, and I think that people realize that I'm someone who understands, because I don't live in Chittenden County, but live in Lamoille County, that we need to have a robust economy for the entire state. We can't just have one part. I think people are starting to get to know what my background is, and the fact that I grew up in the state. I grew up in Lamoille County. My parents moved up here when I was 5 because they thought that Vermont had incredible opportunities. So I think people are starting to know those kind of things.
Yeah. Now, your 2 fellow candidates for the nomination for Lieutenant Governor are from Chittenden County, Dave Zuckerman and Keisha Ram. Yeah. And I saw you all at the Windham County Democratic Committee's forum up in Bellows Falls, and got a sense to kind of see how you all placed yourself in terms of the voters' minds there. It felt like David, being a progressive Democrat, was really trying to lean to the left a bit, trying to glom on to what Bernie Sanders is talking about. Keisha Ram certainly leveraged her youthfulness and a fresh perspective. Where are you carving yourself out a niche in this?
Well, I've basically been the leader of the Democratic Party in the legislature and in the House for the last 8 years. And so my niche is, if you want somebody who knows how to get things done and who can get things across the line, like civil marriage, increasing the minimum wage, paid sick leave, renewable energy, allowing home care workers to unionize, allowing child care workers to unionize. If you want somebody who has not only talked about issues but gotten them done, then I'm the guy that you want in that office. And I'm also the person who understands, having lived in Chittenden County, having lived outside of Chittenden County, having been a Vermonter since I was 5, I understand sort of the transition that Vermont's gone through and the opportunities that we have.
Yeah. Now, for a lot of that time you've been House Speaker, some of the agenda items you've been moving forward have been from Governor Peter Shumlin down here in Windham County. Yeah. You've worked with him on a lot of different things. Would you say it's fair to say that you're kind of similar mind as he is on key issues?
Well, that's not always true. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. Peter and I have worked together for a long time. The 8 years that I've been Speaker, he was first President pro tem, and he has been governor for the last 6. I think that both of us share a common desire to see Vermont be stronger, even from an economic perspective, and we want to make sure that everybody has opportunities in the state. Sometimes we see different ways to get there. I think that anybody who's seen the 2 of us in a room knows that we have very different types of personalities. But I would say that he and I have become good friends throughout this, and even though we're good friends, we can disagree pretty vehemently about particular issues. Yeah.
Phil Scott, also been Lieutenant Governor for most of your tenure up at the State House here, and he stands a pretty fair chance of being the next governor. I've heard you talk about having a good working relationship with him, but how do you envision handling situations when you're at political odds with him, since he is a Republican, or even on the off chance that Bruce Listman gets elected governor, you're going to have to work with somebody on the opposite side of the aisle?
So I imagine that whether a Democrat is elected, and my hope is that one of the 3 that's in the primary will be elected governor, or a Republican, there will be moments in time where we disagree. And my style is to say, look, we both have a desire to make this a better place for Vermonters, but I disagree with the way that you're going about this. And I think it's on incumbent on the person that's disagreeing to say, and this is what I think we should do instead. So, that's the way that I would expect to deal with whether it was a Governor Scott or whether it was a Governor Minter or a Governor Dunn. I would see myself as saying, where we can work together, I'm going to work as hard as we can to make Vermont a better place. Where we disagree, I'm going to be clear about why we disagree and what the alternative path is.
Well, speaking of the 3 Democratic candidates, you've also worked with all of them. I believe your time has overlapped with all of them when they've been serving in the State House, either as members of the Senate or the House, and Sue Minter, certainly as the Agency of Transportation Secretary. Talk about some of those differences of opinion on policy that you might have with them.
Well, I have not followed as closely as I probably should have what they're laying out. I agree with Senator Galbraith or Ambassador Galbraith, Senator Dunn, and Secretary Minter all have put out plans on finding a way to make college more affordable for Vermonters. And I agree with them on that. I think we also ought to acknowledge that college isn't going to be the right thing for everybody. And so not only should we be figuring out a way that college can be affordable, but we ought to figure out a way that training for people who might want to do something different could be affordable as well. Say somebody wants to go into plumbing or wants to be an electrician. We ought to show them a way that they can get that professional training in a way that they can afford, because you can make a good living doing things like that as well. So, we'll have some differences of focus and emphasis. Let's figure out a way to make the prosperity for Vermonters widely shared.
Yeah. That's something that's kind of neat about the lieutenant governor position. It occurred to me, thinking about this, that it's nice that you have that autonomy to run not as a ticket, but independently, because it also allows you to focus on things that are important to you. You all at that forum up in Bellows Falls talked a bit about how you would use the office to travel around the state, meet with constituents, focus on different issues. I know Phil Scott came down here on a number of occasions for his business pitch sessions. What are some of those things that you would see yourself focusing on?
One of the things that has been a primary focus of the campaign so far has really been about childhood poverty and early childhood education. As somebody who has a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old in the public school system, you see every day the challenges that many young Vermonters are facing, the real challenges around poverty and family stability. And part of the way that we can help that is trying to make sure that we're lifting all boats by further looking at increasing the minimum wage and family leave, and also making sure that people have access to substance abuse treatment and affordable housing. But part of it is also making sure that people are living in stable environments and that they get educational opportunities as soon as they're born. Let's Grow Kids, an organization that's around the state trying to advance 0 to 3 education, is saying, hey, we know that brain development is most important in the first 3 years. We've got to figure out a way publicly to make sure that happens for all our kids. Those are the kinds of things that I'm going to focus on for kids for the state of Vermont.
Yeah, well, there seems to be an opportunity in schools to deliver some of those other services. Obviously, the meals program in school does that already. Your thoughts on doing more in terms of pushing education and social services closer and closer together? Is that something you could see working?
Yeah, I do think so. So I was just in Williamstown Elementary School about 3 weeks ago, and Williamstown has a high incidence of poverty in the town. And I was talking to the principal. Principal vacates his office 1 day a week to provide space for counseling for kids provided by Washington County Mental Health to help those kids even before they start to experience behavioral problems in the classroom. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could co-locate some counselors for the family, maybe through DCF, in the schools as well, because we know we have some space, so that we could have family services inside the educational environment. And it's more accessible for people. It allows the families to come together and perhaps in a less threatening environment. I think those are the kinds of things that you can advocate for as Lieutenant Governor, bring people together to see how those things can happen.
Yeah, of course, the main challenge right now with education is finding equitable ways to pay for it. Money, exactly. Yeah. You kept a blog while you were speaker there for the last couple years, and your last post, other than saying goodbye during this last. Do you remember the post?
Yeah, I don't remember the post.
It was about Act 46, and really advocating for it. It was at the time in January when you had just come back into session, and we're making a couple of tweaks to it that you felt were necessary, that a lot of constituents after feedback said were necessary to it. But you said in that the cost containment measures were an overwhelming success in many parts of Vermont. It was such a new law at the time. I was curious when I read that what you were basing that on.
So there had been a couple of different mergers that had already happened within 6 months of Act 46 passing. And what you saw was administrative efficiencies in many of those particular mergers. And their business officers were saying, this is how much money we're going to save. Now, that's not going to be the case in every single one of these mergers. Let's step back for a moment or so, because I think it's important to think about the context that Act 46 was passed. We have 20% fewer students now than we had 20 years ago in the state of Vermont. And many of our schools are facing real challenges staying open because of that demographic challenge. We also have a law that Act 60 and Act 68 that requires us to have equitable educational opportunities for all of our kids. Now, we do that on the financing side, but when you think about the fact that kids on different sides of invisible lines, town lines, school district lines, may get different opportunities, I think the question is whether we're delivering the promise of Act 60 and Act 68 to our kids so that they will all have equal educational opportunities. And that's really what Act 46 in the end was about. Now, we've gotten a lot of feedback about it, and I know that there are a lot of communities down here who are finding real challenges in trying to figure out how to make it work. I think 2 years in, it's appropriate to step back and say, okay, where's this worked? How has it worked? Are there some tweaks to help people figure out a way to advance what the ultimate goal, which is equal educational opportunities?
Well, I mean, Windham County, I think we're going to be late adapters to this law. I mean, a lot of communities are missing the deadlines right now to qualify for the highest tax advantages. Wondering if there's any conversation of extending those. It seems like it's a program where you don't necessarily want to penalize somebody just because they're a little bit more cautious.
I think that would be something that would be worth taking a look at. You know, I think that part of the tax incentives was to really spur communities on to go into Act 46, not because we wanted people to do things that just didn't make sense for them, but to give them an added incentive. And if we think that there is an opportunity to get people to do what the right thing is for their communities, and part of it is giving them the incentives instead of sticks, carrots rather than sticks, I'd be open to reevaluating that.
Yeah, and how about school choice? That seems to be another bone of contention, certainly in the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union with the town of Vernon, but also in other parts of the state.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have a long tradition of school choice in individual communities throughout the state. Now, we don't have that for every community, but because of the way that our state developed, there is a long tradition, and I just don't think that we're in a place to disrupt that tradition. So, for those communities that have had that right now, I think we ought to help them to or make sure that it's not foreclosed.
Yeah, makes sense. Act 46, just one of the issues that certainly does not necessarily have bipartisan opposition. I think you find people on both sides of the aisle and progressives too who have concerns about that. Another one being renewable energy siting. There was the veto session that you all came back and tweaked the renewable energy siting bill. Do you think you got it right? Could you see that coming back for further tweaks?
So I do think that we got that right, and I think that's an example of how the Lieutenant Governor's office can be used, because we came back, we had a challenging situation. We had a bill that would fix the problems that the administration had identified for legitimate political reasons. I think people were saying we want an override, and we worked to make sure that the fix, which was the best policy option, I think, was the way we went, instead of an override, which could have succeeded or failed, and was fun politically, but wasn't really going to get what we needed to get done. I got a chance to work with the lieutenant governor to figure out how we were going to get that all the way through that day. You know, there was a 27-2 vote for the fixed vote, Republicans, Democrats, Progressives in the Senate. In the House, it was a little more challenging because the minority leader had said no way, no how. And we were able to work together, the lieutenant governor, the minority leader, and others to try to get that fix done and get out of there in one day.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, this isn't your responsibility as a lawmaker, but it might be more so as a lieutenant governor to make the case for policies like this, to go around and talk about the importance. It strikes me as a disconnect right now, obviously, in the Wyndham-Grafton area. They're very concerned about visual pollution, noise pollution, less worried about the carbon pollution that necessitates wind power.
So I think that this is a challenge that we face with any projects that have a public good element to them. This comes up with roads, it comes up with dams, it comes up with electrical lines, it comes out with power development. And the tension that exists between local control and local issues and the more general public good is one that's very challenging. And the fact of the matter is we do need power generation in the state. And we've got to figure out a way that we can do it that respects many of the local concerns, but doesn't create a local veto for every option. And that, I think, is what we did with the bill that we passed. Local planning gets incorporated into regional plans and ultimately is signed off on at the state level. And I think it gives the kind of local input that we need for issues like Grafton and Wyndham. And you know, in Grafton and Wyndham, Iberdrola has said, if those towns vote to not want the wind towers, we're not going to build them. Now that's a developer that's made that decision, and I think we've got to figure out a way to give communities that kind of say throughout the state.
Yeah, while at the same time trying to incentivize developers or other businesses to do business in these towns where they have this kind of local control. That's another balance. How do you see yourself?
That is the challenge, because the reality is that we have 15,000 renewable energy jobs in this state that weren't here even 8 years ago. And that's because of intentional investments that we've made as a state in tax credits and in our standard offer project, which is guaranteed rates of return for development, for renewable energy development. And we need to make sure that we're creating the jobs that the next generation wants to do. I mean, I've met a lot of young people who are working for solar developers who are excited about both doing good for the planet and doing good for business. And we want to encourage those kind of things. So I'm going to be, as Lieutenant Governor, someone who's going to look at areas that are going to help the planet, but also might help our economy.
Let's talk about guns for a second, because the Vermont Mayor's Coalition recently called upon lawmakers to take action on universal background checks. Some of the more influential Democratic senators have been the ones voting against some measures that many people will consider common sense gun legislation. Obviously, being Lieutenant Governor, there's a situation there where depending on how you feel about things, you might be able to enact a little bit more pressure, a little bit more leverage. What do you think is actionable? What do you think is possible on gun legislation in a state like Vermont?
I support background check legislation. I will say this, I still am not sure whether we could get it through the House or the Senate right now. And what is challenging is that there is a mistrust on both sides of the other's motives. On the more traditional side, there is this view that it's all about taking away people's guns. And on the side that wants more gun control, it's this no way, no how mentality that they're worried about and trying to block everything. In my job as Speaker for 8 years, it's been about trying to bring people together and figure out how we're going to advance the ball. And as Lieutenant Governor, I think that opportunity exists too. So I was talking to Mayor Lozon, who's the mayor of Berry City, earlier this week. We were talking about something that the mayors are trying to do, bring advocates together and convene over a series of months groups so that they can talk to each other and get to know each other and then maybe move the issue forward. And I think that's the kind of thing that we have to do. We have to start talking to each other, building coalitions. And Braden, who hails from down here, has been about trying to create those communications. She's done it bravely in a number of moments where she was threatened. We need to actually figure out a way to have these conversations without demonizing the other side.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think about, it wasn't last session, it might have been a couple sessions ago, but there was a piece of legislation specifically about people who have temporary restraining orders against them in domestic violence incidents.
Yep.
Removing guns from their house, not allowing them access to their guns while that court proceeding took place. And I think that actually was a House bill, and it died in the House. And I was thinking at the time, I was like, if we can't pass this, what is possible?
So we do have a system by which you are supposed to have those guns taken away and they're warehoused. We don't have a very good tracking mechanism, and we need to get the numbers better understood. We also passed something that mirrors the federal legislation that says if you have been adjudicated either a danger to yourself or to others, you cannot have a gun. And that was actually hard to get over the line. That shows the intensity of the issue. I think Vermonters are getting to the point where they're just saying, you know what, we think background checks make sense, and we're going to look at that again next year.
Yeah. Whoever is governor and lieutenant governor is going to inherit the Vermont Health Connect system, some of the issues with the website. At that forum, I asked the question to all three of you, if it continued to have problems with the website, would you consider moving to the federal exchange? You were the most assured in answering yes to that question. I was wondering what you were seeing in the system and knowing what you know about how it's transpired that made you answer like that.
Well, I mean, I answered that way because, first of all, I think that we're making progress, and we have out to bid right now a contract for the legislature to analyze where we stand with Vermont Health Connect now, what would happen a year from now, what it looks like a year from now, and what would be the consequences of us moving to another option, so that the next legislature and the next governor will have an independent review to allow them to make those decisions. I believe that if we can't get Vermont Health Connect right, we will continue to lose confidence of Vermonters. And even if it is a better option than the federal exchange, it worries me if Vermonters just don't have confidence in that. At the end of the day, we need to have something that functions, that's affordable, and that does what we want it to do. And that's going to be the benchmark for me in deciding whether we move to a federal exchange or a regional exchange.
Yeah, well, that was another thing I was thinking about. I mean, we already have a lot of relationships, especially down here in Windham County with Dartmouth-Hitchcock over in New Hampshire. Is there possibilities there for something a little bit more New England-centric?
Well, we've talked with Connecticut about that, and we've talked with others. I know that Lawrence Miller, who is the advisor to the governor on healthcare matters, has explored that option. We are in different insurance markets. Unfortunately, insurance is regulated on a state-by-state basis. And so making sure that you have consistency within the states in the product that's being delivered can be tricky. If we could do it, and if we could make something function, I would be open to that idea.
Yeah. You brought up child poverty as something that you really want to look at and focus on when you travel around the state as lieutenant governor, and mention a lot of things in the early education arena. Let's talk a little bit about higher education here in Vermont and things that are possible there to make that aspect of it more accessible.
Yeah, it's no secret that our funding is lower than most other states. This year we did bump up the appropriation to the Vermont state colleges. Not by enough, but it was 2%, and that's a good start. I think we're going to need to continue to look at that area. I think we also have to explore more innovative options to help universities and colleges out, particularly the UVM and the state colleges. 2 years ago, we gave the Vermont state colleges, and Vermont Technical College in particular, money towards some advanced manufacturing equipment. And we said, we'll give you this money if you can get match from the private sector, we'll give you even a little bit more. It allowed them to buy advanced manufacturing equipment, partner with local employers, and allow their students to work on this equipment and train to actually get jobs at this plastics manufacturer. Those are the kinds of things that I think we should think about, maybe helping out on capital expenditures that gives kids an opportunity to get trained and then get jobs right afterwards.
And do you see that sort of higher education initiative as something, well, I guess what's the priority? Is it keeping young people in the state or attracting more young people from other places to Vermont?
So we have a captured market right here. I mean, we have all of these college students. And I'll talk about Champlain College, which is up north, but I think is an example that maybe we could use in trying to work with all of our public and private colleges in the state. They have over 70% of their students are from out of state. Over 50% of their students actually get their first job in Vermont. The reason, they require every one of their students to have an internship. Many of those students do their internships in Vermont and get bound to employers here. Wouldn't it be great if we encourage that and figured out a way to partner with institutions around the state to have that happen in more and more of our institutions, because that's one of our greatest imports is college students. If we didn't export them after they graduated, we could actually change the demographic trend in this state.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Champlain College. A lot of their students take online courses, and I had not put it on my notes, but certainly infrastructure, broadband, still a challenge here in this part of the state. I've got a couple of minutes here, so let me ask you about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of my, so I drove down from Morrisville this morning, and
looking for signal.
91 is pretty signalless. I was going to call the governor, but I couldn't actually use my cell phone.
Try Route 30 sometime.
Right, yeah. So, I think one of the regrets that I have as Speaker of the House is, given how cheap money has been, capital money over the last few years, I think maybe we should have made a decision to bond and partner with private institutions or with local municipalities to try to build out broadband more effectively. We're going to have to put some, I think, capital money into those kind of partnerships over the coming years, because in many of these areas, it doesn't make sense from a market perspective to build out, and it's going to require public investments just like we did with rural electrification.
Yeah. Shap Smith, wish I could continue talking to you all day, but we are out of time. Really appreciate your time, though.
Okay, my pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
Want to thank Shap Smith for joining us and remind you all to watch this episode on channels 8 and 10. You can find out when it will be scheduled by visiting the website brattleboro.tv.org. It will also be available there by demand. Also want to remind everybody that the primaries are August 9th. Make sure you go out and vote. If you aren't going to be around, you can go to the town clerk's office and get an early ballot. Thank you.